For the third year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love.
And what are some of the things that you really run out of time? And we've got to talk about your latest. I want to go back a little bit, first of all, and celebrate a true legend.
Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work.
And did you pursue performing opportunities while you were in high school? Did you?
Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
Happy New Year, everyone. That's our new opening. Thank you, Leo Rodriguez, for putting that together. Thank you, Tess Labella, who did our great opening voiceover. And thank you, Glenn Charlo, for those great graphics. And thank you to our wonderful guest, Chip Deffaa, who is waiting in the wings. And there he is, our very first guest for 2022. And today it's 2, 2, 2, 2. All these twos popping up, and here are the two of us. The two of us. Chip, I am so thrilled that you are here, our first guest of the year. And I want to ask you, first of all, Happy New Year. Welcome. I hope you had a great holiday season. And in addition to this great new CD that I'm in love with, what else are you celebrating today?
Oh, just being alive and being here, and happy to be your New Year's baby. Richard, it means a lot to be here, and I thank you. And also a shout out of thanks to Howard Tucker, who may have helped facilitate this get together, and however it happened, I'm grateful to be here.
Well, he's part of it. I will say this because Howard is a very dear friend to both of us, but I saw that it was your birthday and I thought, I've known you a long time. Why not bring you on the show and celebrate you? We've known each other and I've seen you over the years, both of us, I think a testament to both of us, if I do pat myself on the back. Both of us have worn a lot of hats throughout our careers in this business. When I first got to know you, it was the fact that you were wearing a hat in the New York Post. You were their resident theater critic, cabaret critic in the New York Post, but you were covering theater as well.
Covering theater, music, jazz, cabaret, all of that,
How did you get, first of all, started writing with the New York Post, and how many years were you with the New York Post?
Okay, this is a funny story because I wound up being at the Post 18 years, and I did not think I was ready for a job like that, okay? And a friend of mine who was writing at the Post named Richard Sudholter, God bless him, I owe him a million thanks. He kept saying to me, you should apply to be a job at the New York Post. I'm like, I'm not worthy, I'm not ready. I'm writing for little papers in New Jersey and magazines. So Richard tricked me. He said, Chip, I need you to cover for me for 1 week. I got to go on vacation. Can you just fill in and review something? I said, I do it as a favor for him. And then the next week he says, Chip, I have to be away. Can you do it one more week? And then the third week, the editor says, what are you giving us this week? I said, what happened? He said, well, Richard left the paper and says, you're the good replacement. And next thing I know, I'm writing for the New York Post. And I never had the nerve to put in an application. He sort of snuck me in there, and I was happy as a clam. I really loved it. I had wonderful editors, and they gave me this freedom nobody else in the city had. So if I found talent in a little club, a theater, anything, they didn't care what I explored, whether it was cabaret, jazz, theater. I had sort of the run of the city. So I would be the first one to write and say, oh, there's this little unknown singer I saw called Nora Jones. And I think she's going to be something. She's got something. It didn't matter whether I liked every song she did. There was something there I saw. And they would sort of trust my judgment. They gave me this tremendous freedom. So that was a lot of fun. And the Post opened a lot of doors. You know, you got to meet everybody. But I was just blessed with the editors I had that they gave me that trust to say, like, you know, I'd say, what do you want me to cover? And they say, no, you're the expert. You cover what you want. Nobody else had that. My friends at the New York Times didn't have that freedom. You know, they you know, so I was lucky. And I got to see a lot of people very young and tout them who became somebody. And that made me feel good too.
Well, let me ask you this. First of all, where does that love for this music and everything begin for you? Did you yourself start out wanting to be on the other side of the footlights?
I did. I performed as a kid. I had amazing people in my life just by coincidences, odd connections. You couldn't make this up in a movie. Living next door to me as a little boy in New Rochelle, babysitting me as a child. He knew my parents before I was born, was a guy, Jack Gottlieb, who was Leonard Bernstein's intimate friend and right-hand man and assistant conductor. So he was a friend of mine from the time he was my babysitter till he died a few years ago. And so he connected me somehow to this world of, you know, I would get to see Bernstein conducting my babysitter's music. So it made me sense and see this guy going to the White House with Bernstein and giving each other cufflinks and stuff. And I was understanding things about life. I was so that's one person. And he was the one encouraging me. He helped find, when I said I wanted to act, he told my parents Chip should go to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and I did, and stuff like that. But he was also good because in some ways, long before I knew what the words were, we connected in some way. And he was a gay man, and I was going to become one. And somehow, don't ask me how, intuitively, kids know more than they think. I can remember as a little kid, his mom, who was very conservative, Orthodox Jewish lady, and she was my honorary grandmother. I called her Grandma Gottlieb. I thought she was my real grandmother. I remember his mom, I'm little, like 5 years old. And she's talking to my mom, and she's trying to say words so I won't understand. And she's saying, I don't know what to do. My son Jackie is what you call artistic. He and Leonard Bernstein are artistic. What should I do? And my mom is saying, well, if they're artistic, that's their nature. They can't change who they are. You have to support who they are. She says, because he and Lenny are, you know, they're going off here together and they're together. And my mom says, that's who they are. You got to love them and take them as who they are. I understood what that meant. Not all the physical details, but in some ways I understood what they were talking about, and that somehow that related to me. And years later, when I told it to Jack Gottlieb, he couldn't believe I could remember that as a kid. I said, yes, your mom was aware you were gay, and she was trying to figure out how to deal with it. My mom was telling her it's okay. There was another mentor in my life when I was little. This is amazing coincidence too. His name was Todd Fisher. He was an old-time vaudevillian, and I was a boy growing up. And Todd had worked with everybody back in vaudeville. He would show me pictures, and I didn't know who these people were, of him working with Gypsy Rose Lee and June Havoc and Mama Rose when they were in the Newsboy days, back when they were very young. Wow. And I had no idea. He would carry these pictures with him and show me. I had no idea who these people were, except they were important to him. And he would tell me stories, and it took a long time to piece them all together and say, like, he would be telling me, you know, and when I played the Palace Theater in 1913, the year it opened, my life's been downhill ever since then. Nothing could top that. Nothing, Chip. Nothing. And he was like 1,000 years old, but he saw something in me. And we would listen to old records together. We'd be listening to Al Jolson and Jimmy Durante, and he would forget that he's like maybe 88 and maybe I'm 10. And he'd give me a song to sing in a show. He'd be putting together a show, and there'd be old timers like his generation, but he liked to feature me because I was he said, Chipper, you got the vaudeville in you. You would have been good in vaudeville. You would have been good in minstrel shows. I didn't even know what these things were. And so he'd give me old sheet music, and he'd hand me something like the International Rag, which he knew when it came out in the early 20th century from Irving Berlin. And I'd say, how do you want me to sing it? What kind of tempo, what kind of feel? And I'm like 10 years old. And he'd say, forgetting I'm 10, he'd say, don't you remember the way Sophie Tucker did it at Reisenweber's Cafe in 1916? She was the talk of the town in 1916. How could you forget that? First tempo slow behind the beat. Then you double the tempo. And it's going to be, London's dropped its dignity. So has France and Germany. She was the first one to double the tempo on songs. How could you forget that? Everyone copied Sophie. It says, I loved Sophie. We all loved Sophie. Every acre of Sophie Tucker. You had to love her. And I'm like, I wasn't born in 1916. My parents weren't yet born in 1916. And he'd have me out there singing. I'm a little kid, and he'd have me singing. He'd say, this song will work for you. It's called You'd Be Surprised You're Going to Get a Laugh. I wouldn't even understand it. I'd be sitting there singing. I may not look like much of a lover, but you can't judge a book by its cover. And I'm a little kid singing a suggestive song, and I don't even know what it means, and I'm getting a laugh. But all I care was I'm getting a laugh, I'm getting applause, So, and he's telling me stories on Fanny Bryce and on Billy Rose. And so different people in my life to this day, I got to thank them, because we would read every week. We would read Variety together. He liked to read Variety and Billboard, but he was so old, he would call them the Billboard and the Variety. Let's see what's in the Billboard. Let's see what's in the Variety this week. Who died? What are the box office grosses? What shows doing well? What shows not doing well? He would teach me the box office grosses of films. He says, yeah, now you remember. When The Singing Fool grossed this much in 1928, that held a record that wasn't broken till Gone with the Wind in 1939. You should know that. Everyone should know that. And I thought that was important to know, like my times tables or the ABCs. So I gotta love Todd Fisher teaching me all these old songs, and he was getting them. He would hand me You'd Be Surprised, and that was sheet music he'd gotten when Berlin had published it. Do you know what I mean? So
absolutely.
When people say, oh, it's odd, all these old Berlin songs, I'm like, it's even odder that I was singing them when I was. So on some of these albums, like on this new album, I get to sing a duet with Jack Corbin, a wonderful young singer. He's as good as anybody his age. And we're doing a song of Some Sunny Day. I've known this song forever. Until he met me, he'd never heard of Irving Berlin. He does a great job, but me, I'm happy to be, it's like my childhood as well as honoring Berlin. So,
let me ask you a question. I mean, you say that before meeting you, he did not know Irving Berlin.
Right.
That which baffles me.
Right.
Number one, it baffles me because to me, Irving Berlin is very much a part of our consciousness. He's a part of our consciousness because there's not a Christmas that goes by that we don't hear White Christmas. My husband Danny and I, on Christmas night, we were alone this year because of COVID. We didn't go to any parties or anything.
Right.
I said, what do you want to do this year? He said, I want to watch White Christmas again.
Right.
And of course, it's Irving Berlin's White Christmas.
Right.
If you get a chance, go and see Cheek to Cheek at the York Theater, and you'll understand why it's Irving Berlin's White Christmas. Yeah. Have you seen it, by the way?
My doctor doesn't want me going to any theater right now because of the Omicron. I would be there in a heartbeat. Otherwise, I love New York. I never miss a show. But right now, the doctor says, because I've got some other medical issues, I cannot be among crowds. So I have to be a little bit more isolated than most people.
I hope
that I recommend the show to other people just because it's New York.
I wish that they could film it and stream it at least for one performance, so that and I'm sure that Equity is preventing that from happening. Because, but it goes into detail as to why Irving Berlin was such a businessman. Right. I was talking with I think a mutual friend of ours this morning, Diana Templeton. And for Christmas, she sent me this book, which I'm sure you have. And Irving Berlin is such a part of our consciousness. On Christmas Day, I get a phone call from London from Anita Gillette, who is also on your album. And I was telling her that you and I were going to be sitting here talking today. She's watching from London. So he's such a part of our consciousness. When someone comes to you and you've reached out to him, obviously, to be a part of this CD, and he says, I don't know who Irving Berlin is, or I'm not familiar with his music, where do you begin with them?
Well, and sometimes I may be exaggerating. Sometimes they may know the name, but they don't quite place it. Do you know what I mean? They may say something to me like, I've heard of Irving Berlin, but they don't quite exactly know who he is or the importance. And I try to tell them, yes, if you've seen the movie White Christmas or Easter Parade or Holiday Inn or any of a lot of other things, or know the Broadway shows Annie Get Your Gun or whatever. But then you try to introduce them gradually. And I say, look, he was actually the most successful songwriter of his generation. He made more money, had more hits of anybody from that era. And we're doing this unique series. Right now, I mean, it always amazes me when some younger person will say, you know, I'm not familiar with Irving Berlin. One of my younger singers, I don't want to say his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but like he was doing an interview and he says, oh yeah, he says, I've always known about Irving Berlin. He's the guy who wrote I'll Be Home for Christmas. And I'm like, no, he didn't write I'll Be Home for Christmas, but it's close. He knew he wrote something about Christmas.
But you would think that Irving Berlin wrote every Christmas song because there's that connection. And a few years ago, because Richard Skipper Celebrates was I did This Is a Live series. And I had one of the highlights of my life was that one of my guests was Catherine Crosby. And Catherine Crosby and I sang White Christmas together.
Yes.
And I still pinch myself that there I am sitting next to Catherine Crosby singing this song. But I want to go back to something. I mean, you mentioned two mentors. And there's more, but those are two I mentioned. Yes. But I grew up, I've talked about this. I'm going to grab her picture here and give her credit again. Florence Epps here. There she is. Who was my mentor growing up when I was a kid. And I've told this story before. Forgive me for those of you who have heard it before. I studied with her in her little playhouse in her backyard, Wednesdays and Thursday afternoons. And if a name came up, let's say Irving Berlin, for example, and she would say to me, okay, Ricky, tell me 3 things that Irving Berlin is known for. And if I could not name 3 things, she would close the book and she would say, I will see you next Wednesday at after school, because I would go after school, would be out, and know who Irving Berlin is. And I would leave the little playhouse and I would run to the Conway Library in Conway, South Carolina, where I grew up. And I would go to the little theater section in our library. Again, this was South Carolina. And I would go through the index of every book that I could find, and I would look up that name. And I would learn who these people were. And so thank God that you and I both had mentors that taught us how important these people were that went before us. And with Google and how easy it is today to search these people out, it amazes me that today's kids don't have that thirst for wanting to know who these people are.
Well, some do, and that's always charming when you meet them. I was happy. Some other young singers that aren't on this album, but they'll be on a future album, Logan and Lawson Saby, I gave them a song. I mailed them some sheet music to look at. And I was amazed and happy that when they came to the recording studio on their own, they had looked up other performances by people from 50 years ago who had done this song. So how did Frank Sinatra do it? How did Jimmy Durante do it? How did Al Jolson do it? And I like that because I hadn't told them to do that, but that they took that initiative and came super prepared. They went even higher in my eyes because it's not enough to just have natural talent. It's like trying to make the most of it. Yeah. And if we're talking about mentors, can I put in a word for Carol Channing? Can I put in a word for Carol Channing?
Hoping that you were going to say this.
Yes.
There she is. Because I was talking to, again, Diana Templeton today.
Right.
And I was saying that you and I, how lucky you and I were. Right. Because she was such a dear friend of yours.
Yes.
She loved you so much.
Thank you. She was such an inspiration to me. Before I met her, I was very undisciplined, which I thought was part of being artistic. And she was the one, when she led by example, that she never missed a performance. So I was very proud that in my 18 years writing for the Post, I never missed a deadline. And everybody else, not everybody else, but a lot of people would say like, someone would say like, oh, I have a bad cold. I can't get in my listings for such and such for the clubs this week. Can you do it? And I'd say, I can do it because you're sick with a cold. But in all those years, and I wound up doing the listings for cabaret, for jazz, and different things, and never missing a deadline. I got colds and I got bronchitis and the flu just like everybody else. But somehow she taught me to power through it. And I can remember her like 27, 28 years ago, a good friend of mine died. Somebody I really liked had died. And I told her like, I don't want to work anymore. I feel like nothing's worth it. What's the point? I don't have the energy to do any work. And she said, no. Chip, you and I, we're meant to work. She says, you will do your best work when challenged. You're going to do some of your best work now. You're going to put those feelings into your work, but you're not going to stop working. And she told me how, about traveling and performing, whether she had a broken arm, whether she had cancer. She was at a time when she was getting treatments for cancer on her day off from Hello Dolly, and nobody in the cast knew it, that she was dealing with it because, and I used to tell her, she had a healing voice. I swear, I believe this. There's the only person I ever knew that I felt this way like, and she could call me up or I could call her up. And if I had aches and pains, by the end of the phone call, they'd be gone. And I'd literally tell her that. I'd say, whatever I thought was bugging me, it's gone. You healed it. And she would laugh and she was kind enough. She made some recordings that are on some of my albums and were used in one of my shows. But she also helped me because every time I go into a recording session now, I'm hearing her guidance in my head, because she used to tell me, Chip, you're too soft. You let these performers walk all over you. You've got to become a benevolent dictator. And because I would tell her about stories about a performer at the last minute canceling to do something else. And she'd say, 30% of actors are flakes. They're not going to show up. You have to book more people than you expect.
A benevolent despot, she used to say to me, a benevolent despot.
Yes. That's it. That's exactly what I meant. Yes. So, and she would tell me like, and I would say, this guy showed up so late for the recording session the first time, so late for the recording session the second time. She said, don't give him a third time. He's only going to get worse. She says, and whether they're doing it out of rudeness or they want to make themselves important or they're just afraid, it doesn't matter. You have to prune those people out of your life. And when I used to start doing these recording projects, there were a bunch of people who would show up ridiculously 2 hours late for a recording session and say, oh, it was the subways. And she'd say, we all know that there are subways to deal with. I get there on time. They can learn to get there on time or don't use them. And these seem like small things, but they were huge pieces of advice. And I just,
But I will say this.
Yeah.
These things that she asked, that she expected of others,
right,
were things that she expected of herself.
Absolutely.
And there were. I said someday I'm going to write a book of the advice that she taught me, because I mean, if you go back to her time with Charles, for example,
right?
He was, and he's given short shrift a lot, but he was a brilliant businessman, and I always give him credit for that. He would get up in the morning before she would get out of bed, and he would go through. There were, I think, there were. Between 6 to 8 dailies, probably more, in New York. He would go through those dailies. He would get all the things that were newsworthy that he felt that were important for her to be knowledgeable on. And he would go through, if he found out that there was a Girl Scout jamboree going on in Central Park, he would find out who the scout leader was. He would call the scout leader and say, this was Carol Channing, folks. And he would say, would you like Miss Channing to make an appearance? And she would show up because it was good for them and it was good for her. Right. And it kept her name in the papers. And she was not beneath doing these things.
Right.
And and she also one time said to me, and I'm sure you know this story, that when she was doing Gentlemen Prefer Blondes on Broadway, Dorothy Kilgallen gave her a scathing review. And I'm going to get back to you with reviews in a moment. But she gave her a scathing review. And that review really got inside her psyche, listen to me, her psyche. And she said that once that got inside of her, she began to think, what if other people started to believe that?
Right.
And it started to affect her performance. And Anita Loos came into her and said, for every person who likes you, there are an equal number who don't.
Right.
Get used to it. And
Right.
Carol said this to me sitting in the back seat of our car. And it changed the way that I look at these things.
Right.
When you were writing reviews,
Right.
You walk a fine line in the community of cabaret, for example, because it's such a small fishbowl.
Right.
The more you write, the more you are seen, the more you get to be known. You also become friends with so many people in the cabaret community. How do you distance yourself from becoming friends with people, and you're also writing about those people? How do you walk that fine line?
That's a hard line to do. And I asked for guidance for that from people who wrote for the New York Times and George Simon, who was a wonderful music critic. There are people who advised me, because George Simon was friends with all the big band leaders. He was the definitive critic on the big band leader, and says you still have to write what you honestly feel and be willing to, that if somebody wants to lose a friendship or whatever you want to call it, because you expressed your opinion, that's going to happen, and so be it. But Simon used to tell me, you want to try to make your points as clearly but as constructively and positively as possible. So I wouldn't be writing something like, oh, they're ugly or something like that. And if I said their strength is on their rhythmic numbers, and I wish they do more of it, and they haven't yet mastered how to do or they don't have enough life experience maybe to do this reflective ballad that they're featuring, and maybe they're stronger at this. You try to do it in such a way that maybe makes my point clear, but is done with a certain amount of love, that this is a way the act could be improved or could be better. And sometimes people get angry and all that. I remember I had written one glowing review of Mel Torme after another. And then I saw a show at Michael's Pub when I wrote, and I thought he wasn't in particularly good voice. The selection of songs didn't showcase him very well. I didn't think it was him at his best, and I didn't think it was a good show. And he wrote me the most scathing review, letter saying, like, how could you write this, and this tears it up, and, don't ever speak to me again. And it was like, I have gotten so many good reviews in my life. And then his publicist called me and he said, I tried to tell him not to mail the letter. Put your feelings down, but don't mail it. You're going to regret it 2 days later. And then the publicist told me again 2 days later, because Stephen Holding in the Times had written him a much worse review, saying he was not in good voice. It was not a good show. And the publicist says, now he's saying Chip was kind of kind to me. So you can't always win. But the point is,
God.
I have a job to do. And there were certain people I wouldn't review or couldn't review because we had gotten too close. And that's why there are other people that can do those reviews or something like that. Some people got to the point where we were more friends, and I didn't want to be in that position of saying, were they good or bad? And that's part of it too. The other thing you learn, if you've been in the business a long time, you learn to just trust your instincts. I have a really good sense of if somebody's really good. And I also have a pretty clear sense as if they're not so good. I've had people, I'm not going to mention names because I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, really wonderful talents who came to a recording studio, and maybe that day they were exhausted or something like that. And I said, we're not going to get what we want today. I want you at your best. Would you mind we come another day? I'm not saying they can't sing. I'm saying I know when they're not their best. And I don't want to put something out that some reviewer is going to say, boy, she can't sing anymore. Or, so you have to cut it both ways. The best part of my work is, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The best part of my work is when you find somebody that's extraordinary. I mean, I've gone to so many shows. And Carol Channing was one of my all-time great theatrical experiences. Channing, Ethel Merman on stage, Pearl Bailey, those were events. That's very rare. But whenever you see somebody really good, and they can be young or old, that's exciting. That was the most fun of my work as a reviewer, because I used to go out. I can't do it anymore, but I used to go out every night. I'd be in a club or a theater or something, you know. So you're constantly seeing people, and for them to stand out. And I remember one time I wanted to do a show on George M. Cohen. And I put an ad in backstage in different places, like we're going to have open call auditions at Ripley Greer Studios. And we had tons of people waiting to audition. And I watched one after another, and they were dreadful. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to put on this show, because I couldn't stand watching any of these people for an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever it is. And then this fellow shows up, John Peterson. I didn't know him at that point. He sings one song, and it's an obscure Judy Garland song, has nothing to do with this show, and I am electrified. And I tell him right then and there, you're my Cohen. I go out in the hall and tell all these people waiting to audition. Some of them have been scheduled by their agents and stuff, and said, you can go home. I found my Cohen. Now, that's not the proper procedure. And they're like angry. And they're like, what do you mean? I've been waiting 2 hours. I got to audition for you. I said, you can audition, but my mind is already made up. I found a guy. I'm never going to find anybody better. This is the most exciting performer I've found like in years. So he's my Cohen. You want to come in and sing, you can, but it's not worth it. I might consider you for something else. And then John said, but I prepared 2 songs. Don't you want to hear my second song? And I say, John, you can sing a second song for my pleasure, but you've already got it. You're going to be my Cohen. Now, at the time, he was under contract with Cabaret. He had done started the national tour, and he was covering the role on Broadway. So he's under contract to Roundabout. And I say, you are my Cohen. And John says, great. What do we do now? He says, I say, I got to start writing the script, because I want to start rehearsals on Monday, and I want to open 3 weeks after that. And he says, well, I'm under contract with Roundabout. And I say, well, you got to quit. He's under a production contract, getting paid good money. I say, you've got to quit them and work for me for free. And he did it. He trusted his instinct that I was writing a show. I say, I'm going to write it to what I see. I see in here a sadness in you. I see a joy in you. I see that you're going to be able to handle the elation, and you're going to handle the sadness I want to put into it. And Cohen's more complicated than people realize. And I've been studying Cohen since I was 9. I mean, it was in my bones. And we started rehearsals with an unfinished script. And it's like, you're going to have this script finished by opening night? Yeah, probably will. Yeah. I'll get this done by opening night. And John could work like that. We went out one time to Minneapolis to try out. We did a week at some Irish festival in Minneapolis, and every day people saw a different show, because every afternoon I would give them a different song or different lines and say, let's try this out tonight. Let's take out that and try these lines and that thing. And John was the type that could go out and do it. Or another time we're in a show, we're in the middle of our run. And I come into John in the afternoon, and I tell him, John, I've written a little song I want you to, I'm going to add to the show eventually. I took in an old Cohen instrumental. I've added some words. It's going to be, follow your heart, my father always told me. Do what you love, the money will find you. I know my father is a truly wise man. I only hope the money knows it too. So I'm singing this to him. And I say, when we get it ready, I say, we don't have anything written out. I'm going to have you add it to the show. And the music director's sitting there, and he says, yeah, it'll take time to write an arrangement and to get the music down on paper. And John says, sing it to me again. I'll do it tonight. Now, John does not read music. He learns it all by ear. I sing it to him, or Richard Danley, our music director, who was a different music director on that show, will sing it to him, and he picks it up by ear. So I sing it to him. At this point, I'm the only one in the world that knows the song. I sing the lyrics from memory. He learns it. He performs it that night a cappella. And my parents were at that performance, and my brother, my sister, and their kids. And none of them knew this was the first time. And the song I wrote was really to honor my dad. And he was crying because he's not a sentimental guy, but he knew that song was a gift for him. And John is the only performer I've ever met that could have done that. And when the music director says, next week we'll have an arrangement, next week we did have an arrangement. So there could be piano accompaniment, but it was so good. I almost considered keeping it in a cappella because he never sang it better. And that's rare. So I got a million more stories, but someday when you do a whole show on John, you can ask him. He has a show by himself, but that's one story. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. You got a lot of questions.
No, but going back to that's an amazing story, and send it my way. I'd love to sit down and talk with him. But going back to the reviewing, and was there ever a time where you wrote a review that you've ever regretted writing?
Oh yes, absolutely. We all have our blind spots, or sometimes you can see somebody and maybe you caught them on a bad night and you don't think they're great. And maybe it takes you a few years to see them better or realize, my God, how did I miss the boat? There's a lot of talent in that person. And maybe the first review I gave them wasn't very good. Or maybe they actually got better in the interim, but you look at it and you're like, boy, I hope they don't remember that I once said they weren't so good, because they are good. It can happen. Tell you, it can happen the other way. I'll tell you something funny. Sometimes you'd have an editor who was really not very good, and the editor would just to fit the space would just chop things randomly. So I remember one thing where when they chopped out some paragraphs, it looked like some strong praise was actually going towards somebody who didn't deserve it. It was not the person. But they were grateful for the review, and they got a good review, and it actually helped their career. But it wasn't. What had been cut out was sloppy editing. What had been cut out was the praise was actually for somebody else, and it was something you could never explain or clarify. And you hoped when you saw the other person who deserved the praise the next time, you could make it up to them sort of by writing the review. But once in a while, you got an editor like that. There was one. Most of my editors were great, but there was one editor I had to actually tell the paper. I say, I cannot have so-and-so edit my stuff. I said, I'd rather not run than have so-and-so, because too many times they would just screw something up. Do you know what I mean? But the Post was an amazing place. It had strengths and it had weaknesses. I got a friend there he was like 17 and he needed a job. And I said, we'll get you in at the Post, just doing anything. You'll be a coffee boy. You're just going to run errands. And if they need something, somebody needs you to carry a stack of paper or pencils from one desk to another, you'll just do menial errands. You don't have to know anything. And so he calls me up. He's 17. He's totally inexperienced. He's never even considered being a writer. And he says, he says, so-and-so, and he names a well-respected editor at the Post. He says, so-and-so told me he's got a conference to take at, and he named a place. And he says, and will you just edit Clive Barnes's copy and make it fit the space? And Clive Barnes was the dean of New York theater critics. And here's my 17-year-old friend who's done nothing. And when he tells me the place where the guy has a conference, I says, look, I don't want to break it to you, but that's a bar. And it's a favorite hangout for Post writers and editors. And he doesn't have a conference there. He's out there with some of these other people he likes. And he's going to be getting drunk he's going to be getting drunk the next 2 hours. He says, so I have to edit Clive Barnes? I say, yes, you do. You have to make Clive Barnes fit the space. I say, try just cutting from the bottom work. What makes this least losses? That day, nobody would ever know it, but that day, Clive Barnes was edited by a 17-year-old because
Oh my God.
But I had good editors. One day I got so angry at the Post because they misspelled my name. They wrote Deffa, and it should have 2 A's on the end. Right. And I wrote them, and I called the editor, and Vinny Mazzetto, and he was a great guy, and I loved Vinny, and Vinny, and I said, Vinny, you know me all these years. How could you run my byline with an A missing from my name? And he says, Chip, I'm sorry. I know it's the end of the world. I owe you an A. And he hangs up. And I'm like, still unsatisfied. Like this is not a satisfactory ending. So the next day I open the Post and there's my byline, Chip Deffaa, Deffaa. He put on a third A to make up for the one he had left off the day.
I saw that coming.
It was just so.
I want to ask you one last question and then we're going to focus on the CD.
Sure.
When you were writing for the Post, obviously you started writing, and you were writing long before there was such a thing as social media.
Right.
When did you feel the tide change?
That's a good question. And I never, I don't know that I could answer that. Things happen gradually, and you don't, you're still just doing what you do. You go out and try to see things and put it out. I think I like the fact that thanks to the internet and stuff like that, I could file my copy from home. I like that. When I was starting at the Post, there were still people there, some people using typewriters. And there were also some people whose job was to take dictation, because there, in the old days, it used to be that a lot of stories were phoned in, and somebody else would actually physically type it in. And I did some reviews that way, where I'd be like, they'd tell me you have to go review Frank Sinatra and get us something in by this time. So I'd be out at seeing Sinatra, and then I'd have to get to a telephone, and and that review would be dictated. And Bernice Doyle, a great friend of mine at the Post, a wonderful secretary, and we became close friends, and she used to throw parties for me and stuff like that. She would take it down. She would type it as I'd speak it. And
wow.
Those reviews had to be, you couldn't go back and change your mind or whatever. And you're just doing it then. But that was part of a tradition. And it also meant if I didn't spell out a name and they didn't know the name might be misspelled, which might embarrass me, but that's all we could do in those days. And then later that job got eliminated, that need for that got eliminated, because it was so easy for people to send in an email or send it in electronically. But I liked being part of it. I liked that when I started in the business, the Wall Street Journal still had one old timer who still hadn't ever gotten to type. He was still doing things by hand with a pen. And other people had to type it then from him, and typeset it. You know what I mean? So there were still those other errors, but I was glad, to have a little bit of that, Walter Winchell on the phone, phoning it in, and somebody's, that was kind of fun to do that sometimes. But the Post was a lot of fun. I never actually quit the Post. I took a leave of absence to pursue more creative options. And I told them I'll be back eventually. And they said the door's always open, but I got so enmeshed in all these things that I thought were just a temporary sideline, mounting plays and producing albums and whatever, that I never went back. But they'd tell me periodically, and once in a while they would call me, and they gave up finally, and they'd say, like, can you write an obit for somebody, because it was somebody that died, maybe I knew them and they didn't know them, and they knew I could do it. And I'd say, okay, but I have other things I'd rather do these days. But I love the Post. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this CD.
Sure,
Love Songs and Such.
Yes.
Just off the top of my head, Karen Mason, Seth Sikes, Anita Gillette, Betty Buckley.
Yes.
And you dedicate this CD to Betty Buckley.
Yes.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Betty Buckley. If she's watching this or she says this, I love, love, love Betty Buckley.
Yes.
Why did you choose to dedicate this to Betty Buckley?
So many reasons. I
admire the two of you together, by the way.
Well, I do admire everything she does, but also in my life, she shows up at significant points in my life. And the last great performance I saw before I had a pulmonary embolism and almost killed me. I saw her. I went down to Washington, and a friend of mine, Victoria Leacock, and I saw her in Hello, Dolly, which was another astonishing performance. And I
Cleveland with Sue Mitsuki, who is watching.
Right. So I loved that. Was like the last good thing I saw. And then I suffered this pulmonary embolism, which I came this close to dying. And for a long time, the recovery was very slow. And the doctors were saying, don't expect much. You may be the rest of your life be mostly bedridden. You may be weaker. You may be downhill from here. And the first performance I got out to see, thanks to Betty Buckley and Jason Robert Brown, I went to see their show at Subculture in New York. That was the first thing I saw as I was beginning to recover. The doctors didn't even think it was time for me to go out yet. And my heart was pounding. It was too much for me, but I was happy to be there. And that sort of was my re-entry to life. So she was the last thing I saw before I was so ill, the first thing I saw coming out of it. And so she had an importance in that year that was, that I associated her with good times. But I like that. I admire people that stick to it through everything. And she's the career I've watched her do these amazing performances. And I've also watched her. I've had the privilege of watching her take a voice lesson. And here she was at the time she was, in a Broadway show, and she's a star and she's won a Tony, and watching her with her voice teacher, humbling herself to see what she can learn. And I've had young people say, like, I don't need voice lessons. I've already, graduate from Juilliard or something. And I'm like, you can always learn something. And I said, if Betty Buckley at her success can still be getting new things from a voice teacher. And it's funny, I recommended her as a master teacher to so many of my younger singers, and only one ever took me up. And they're like, oh, it would be too much money, be that. But if you're serious about your career, you want the best teachers. And I was disappointed that others who were spending the money, but on other things, on outfits or something, didn't realize that investing in a good career. But Betty, my hat's off to Betty Buckley. But I love everybody on this album, or they wouldn't be there. They're all
absolutely. It's a great. I mean, and you open the when I first put it in, I purposely did not look to see who was on it. The first voice that I hear is Karen Mason.
Right.
And I'm going to say something, and I will say this publicly, and I sincerely mean this. I just went to see Karen Mason, the first show that I saw in a while because of COVID. Karen Mason at Feinstein's 54 Below. And I put Karen up there with Judy Garland, Barbara Streisand, and Lena Horne. When she walks into a room and she hits that stage, she owns the room.
She's wonderful.
And I've phenomenal.
And I've seen her since the beginning. So when she has a new album out, that's cool. And she has a new album this year, but I can remember when her first album, or I may have had it on a cassette tape. It wasn't even a CD at that time. It was out in the 80s, because to me, that voice was there. And again, it's one of those things that I was thrilled to have her. I wanted her to sing Always. She didn't. This is the difference. Some of my young people are learning who Irving Berlin is. She didn't learn the song for the album. We just asked her to do it the way she has it in her repertoire. So that's her own arrangement. And she worked it out live with our pianist, Richard Danley. But it's the way she's been doing this song. That's her. So I have a very special treatment. And sometimes I'll have a young person come and say, I'm a good sight reader. Just give me a song and I'll learn it in the studio. I don't want them to learn it in the studio. I want them to find their own take on, just the way she finds her own take on Always. It's a classic song. She's singing differently than anybody else would, and she finds her own take on it. And of course, Anita Gillette. So I wanted to have Rob Lester had told me, get Anita Gillette, and I'm so grateful he suggested that. But she worked with Berlin, and so even if she wasn't as wonderful and delightful as she was, I love that historic connection that she worked with.
Mr. B.
Yeah, and it's funny. I had one of the young singers again told me, says, I don't think I'm as good as you think I am. He didn't have the confidence. And I said, how am I supposed to be on an album with Stephen Bogardus? And he had seen when Stephen Bogardus was recording. He says, I grew up listening to him on cast albums like Falsettos. He says, like, he's one of my theatrical heroes. I grew up listening to him on albums. How can you put me on an album when I'm a teenager? And I said, because you are at the level now that he was when he was your age. And I knew him when he was your age. I knew him when he was 19. I can close my eyes, see him singing at 19, and he had potential. He's better now, but that's why he's been on a million of my albums, because he was good then, he's good now. And if I see it in you, and then he started thinking, you think I'm like he was sort of like, I'm not worthy to be on an album with someone like him because I grew up listening to him on albums. I said, well, maybe someday someone will say, of you. You never know.
And that reminds me of another Carol Channing story.
Sure.
Carol Channing, when she opened in Las Vegas, and she used to tell this story that in those days, Las Vegas was 24 hours. And it was 4:00 in the morning, and Jimmy Durante was the hottest act in Las Vegas. And everybody showed up for him, and no one wanted to follow him. And she raised her hand and she said, I'll follow him. Because she said, all I needed to do was to step into the love that was already generated by him. And that's what you have to say.
Yeah.
Just step into the love that's already on the album,
Good.
and you're going to shine with the rest of them.
Yeah.
And and that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And thank you for saying that. You're at the level that he was when he started,
Yeah.
and God bless you for sharing these great artists of who are seasoned artists
Right.
with the ones who are just getting started, and obviously they're not just getting started. They've been around long enough to pay somewhat of their dues to reach the point where they deserve a place at this table. And you give them that right, Chip. So
Thank
God
you.
bless you for that.
I also love it when somebody writes me and says that they heard somebody for the first time on my album, and now it's made them want to check them out. So if somebody didn't know Bobby Belfry's work and likes his work on my album, which is wonderful, he sings How Deep Is the Ocean wonderfully, and then decides I can go see him someplace in New York, and I write the guy, say, yeah, go see him at Brandy's. You're going to become a fan. Then I've done some good too, that it's spread it. But I'm happy when somebody like Analise Scarpaci, who's wonderful, she's been recording with me for a while. She was just wonderful as a teenager. Now she's having success in Mrs. Doubtfire. I didn't doubt her from the day one. She would come into my studio so prepared and sing with heart and sing with feeling and hit every note cleanly and perfectly. And I'm like, and sometimes somebody would say to me, like, why are you going to give space? There's only so many slots to somebody who no one's ever heard of. And I'll be like, because they're good. And because when I was young and Todd Fisher was putting me in these shows, he would always say, with an all-star cast, I'd be embarrassed. I'd be 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old. I'd say, I'm not an all-star. And he'd say, Chip, I was playing out in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and the theater marquee would say all-star vaudeville. People didn't want to say mediocre vaudeville, some pretty good performers. They want to see all-star vaudeville. I'd be turning my back on 100 years of show business if I didn't say you're part of an all-star cast. So they always say an all-star cast, even if some of them aren't quite stars yet, but that's part of the tradition.
Well, I've got my questions. As those of you who watch my show know, one of my inspirations was James Lipton inside the Actors Studio. He would always end his show with his list of questions. I did not steal his list of questions. I put my own questions together. So I've got some questions for you today, and to wrap us up. And my first question to you is, what makes you happy?
Oh, so too many things I'm just grateful to be alive. After almost dying 2 years ago with a pulmonary embolism, every day is a blessing. But everything is, I'm lucky. I have wonderful friends. I get to do work I love with people I genuinely love. I get to sing to my deer every night. You should come over sometime and let me feed the deer. Last night they were getting homesick from Laura Live and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which did the Carol Channing number. I was singing them that, singing that, and a George M. Cohan song nobody in the world knows called Life is Like a Musical Comedy. Life is like a travesty show. He died while he was writing it while he died, and he never got the chance to copyright it, to publish it, to record it. And I'm one of the few people that has it, and I'll sing it to my deer, and they have to like it. I like all that stuff. I like being with people I love, and I can't complain. I have no complaints. I have the luckiest job in the world, if you want to call this a job, writing the plays, writing the books, writing the songs, producing the shows, and then what a day like this is great. What a wonderful thing you've given me today, Richard, and
what you've given me. This is wonderful. So, and my next question is, are you a minimalist or a collector?
Oh, I'm the ultimate collector. All my life, I have thrown out nothing. Someday I have to give away some of these things. There's a book that was given to me by Todd Fisher when I was a kid called Showbiz from Voix de Video. I read it. When I was fifth grade. I read it. It was like 600 pages, the most comprehensive history of the first 50 years of the 20th century. I have to find a young person who's into old show business to give this to, because I know the book by heart now, and somebody who wants to know you find somebody and I'll mail it to them that'd find a good home for that book, because it's all that's in my head. But I don't need to hold on to all the things I've got, but I've got every photo I've got every 78 of Al Jolson ever made, and the 78s of Fanny Bryce and of George M. Cohan's rare stuff. I want to put some of those out on albums just because I want to share them so that when I'm gone, at least if they're on CDs or on a digital album, they'll circulate more freely. Right now, you'd have to come over to my house and listen to a 78, but I got really rare stuff. And I got.
Well, I'm gonna give you a piece of this. Is my advice to you for the new year, not to be morbid or anything.
No,
but I am going through this right now with my friend Peggy Eason, who passed away.
Right.
Find a home for each of these items, because if you don't, someone who doesn't appreciate them after you're gone, someone will want to throw those things out.
I know that.
They will not find so make
That's
a
good
list.
Advice.
Make a list, and that's for everybody who's watching. These things that you know will find a good home, find a home for them, and know where they're going to go. So do that. This probably goes in line with what you just mentioned. If we were to open your cabinet of curiosities, what would we find there?
Oh my gosh, too much. A stone I carried back from when I climbed Mount Popocatépetl in Mexico. Just too many things. I have, I have every playbill of every Carol Channing show. She was such a great favorite of mine. But just, I have. Do you know she made an audio recording of her autobiography? I'm one of only 2 people who have a copy of it. They never got around to putting it out. If I died tomorrow, those would be thrown out. And I've got it on 10 CDs. She made this amazing thing. It would win a Grammy if we could just get that out. That I'd like to get out.
Let's make that happen, Chip. I've got it too. What are your expectations and desires for the new year?
Oh, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled with what I'm doing. This is going to sound silly, Richard, but I want to record an album of my own and maybe get some few friends on it. But some of these songs that Todd Fisher was teaching me when I was 10 that I sing to my dear every night, I want to just get it out there. Even if nobody but my nieces and nephews ever listen to it, it's part of who I am and that. But we're making right now. John Peterson's making a movie of the George M. Cohen at Night, which is right now it's winning all these awards and festivals. I'd love to see that take off. I'd love to see some more of my projects filmed, and I have scripts I want to do when the pandemic's done. But first, we got to get through this pandemic.
That's right. And there's nothing silly about that, by the way.
Nope.
Now I've got this great book, and we're starting a movement. And this is from my friend Kassira McKee, who may be watching. And this book is called Let That Go. Good. So that's my mantra for the year. So let that go, everybody. But I want to ask you, what are you letting go of as we go into the new year?
Oh, every year is the same thing. You try to, I'm a temperamental guy, hot-headed guy sometimes. I'm trying to let go of or not hold on to any grudges, try to start the new year with more, love for the people that are in your life that you may have, not only may have, I know I do, sometimes have said something in haste that was angry or something like that, and you don't want to lose them as a friend, and you don't mean it that way, and you try to make some patches, repair some of those bridges and stuff like that. But generally, I'm very grateful for what I've got, and it's nice to work with these people. I haven't named half the people who've been kind to me or half the people on the album, and I hope nobody feels neglected and out. But I'm grateful to every one on that album, and some of these people, just Matt Nardozzi, a young actor on this album. I used to see him in Broadway shows. He wound up winning a Young Entertainers Award out in Hollywood for some of the work he did with me, and he thanked me when he got his award in Hollywood and dedicated the award to me. That's more reward than any money I ever made. These are the nice parts of life when this cycle of life comes around, and a lot of people helped me when I was older, and I've helped some young people, and it's nice to see it all come around.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, what do you desire for the new year for everyone?
Oh, I just desire everybody to have health, and let's get through this pandemic okay. And I wish people to find things that fulfill them, whether it's in personal relationships or friendships or work or whatever,
Oh, good. And what goals have you set for 2022?
Oh, I've always got too many goals. There's a show I want to write for Beth Bartley, a wonderful singer of mine. There's another show I want to do. There's only so many things you can do. And I want to get out, like I said, some of these historic CDs of the people like Fanny Bryce and Cohen and Jolson, stuff like that. And there's always more of these CDs. I have another CD in the works it'll be I don't want to let all the secrets out of the bag, but there's always things
in your cabinet of curiosities. So that's good.
That's good.
When it comes to your career, what's the biggest single result that you desire to have in 2022?
Oh, I part of me says I'm getting all that I desire already, but it would be nice to have. There's a play I want to get done on my friendship with George Burns. I'd love to get that out there. There's so many things. I'm looking at his picture now, so he's reminding me like don't get it. And this morning I made eggs the way he taught me to make them. So it's like in my head, it's like yeah, he deserves to be in a play someday. It's just all the things we don't. Sometimes the things I think I'm going to get done this year might take 3 years, but eventually, God willing, if the good Lord wills it and the creek don't rise, you try to get these things done.
Right. That's right. And my last question to you is, do you believe in affirmations?
Oh, sure.
And do you have a favorite affirmation that you want to leave us with?
Oh, I mean, I just, Carol Channing used to say, I can hear in my ears, she say, happy is he who carries the banner, which she'd gotten from her father. And I believe that strongly. And she used to say, create something every day. When you create something, even if it's a sandcastle, you're closer to becoming whole and well. And I follow her, that thing, that belief in that.
Wow, that's true. Absolutely. And I want to thank you so much for being here. That was her. That was Carol. I know it was her.
Yes.
I've loved you for years and years and years. You've always been so kind. You've been so kind to me over the years, and this was the best way for me to start this year. So thank you for being here. Don't go anywhere for a moment. I want to thank everybody that showed up today. It's a great way for me to start the year with all of you. Thank you for being here. If this was your first time here, I hope it won't be your last time. Tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I hope you'll come back. I'm going to be sitting down with Pamela Myers. We've got some incredible people waiting in the wings. So if this is your first time, there's a button right here on my banner on richardskippercelebrates.com that says join in the celebration. Click on that banner and continue to come back time and time and time again. When I go live, you will be able to do that. I don't know if you know this, I have a newsletter that's called The Skipper's Guide. The Skipper's Guide sets sail every Sunday night at midnight. And if you go to my website, which is richardskipper.com, and you sign up for that, you will get that. I don't spam. I do not send it out to other people. It just goes out once a week, and it gives you like a TV guide, a listing of who is coming up that week. So you can go and sign up for that right now, and you'll get it tonight at midnight. It'll be waiting in your mailbox tomorrow morning. And I also give a throwback to one of the interviews that I did a year ago this week. So you'll see what was going on a year ago on this show. So leave a comment on today's show. Share this with your friends. And I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list, go to the second name that pops up, and reach out with a phone call. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message, a phone call. And let that person know what they mean to you. As our dear friend David Friedman always says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And I always say, if you're going to go out in a boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. Now, Chip, I'm going to leave the screen, and I'm going to give you the final word. Anything that you want to say about anything that we talked about today that you want to build upon, or anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to anyone who's watching right now, you've got the final word. Don't worry about how to end the show. As soon as you say goodbye, I will end the show. Thank you for watching. And everyone, make this a wonderful, happy new year. It's all in your hands. Thank you.
And thank you for just having me. And thank you to all my friends. And I have no other words to say. I just appreciate everything that's happened this year. Thank you.